Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yoma Yud Zayin. What we're going to first do is I noticed a lot of people were confused by yesterday, and I did some extra research after class also to figure out a few more issues. So we'll start with a good review of yesterday's daf and put everything into context. And it'll also be a prep for what we're going to do today. So we started with these two Mishnayot. We had the Mishnah in Tamid and the Mishnah in Midot. Okay, we're going to see them again today. I'll pull them up on the screen for a minute. Okay, here's our screen. And okay. So we have the Mishnah in Tamid, which said, Talemi Lishkat Beit Hatzlaim. Okay, the focus, I just want to remind you, the focus of Masechet Tamid is the Korban Tamid. So obviously the focus of this Mishnah is going to be, let's deal with the sheep. That's the Taleh. So go bring the sheep from the Lishkat Beit Hatzlaim. So the focus is very different. Midot is telling us where everything is and what the temple looks like. Midot are measurements. The whole idea of the Masechet Midot is to say where things are in the temple. It's true that while we're discussing other things, we hear about the temple and things that happen in the temple, and that's where we're going to have these contradictions. So take the Taleh from Lishkat Beit Hatzlaim, and then they say, and by the way, hello, Lishkat Hatzlaim, Ayta b'Mitzot Tzfonit Ma'aravit. Where was it? Now it's obvious that what they mean is it's in this room called the Beit HaMoked. Right? The Beit HaMoked was a place where there was this fire. The fire was used to warm the Kohanim. This right heating system. So they say go to the northwestern corner of this room. That's where the Lishkat Hatzlaim was. There were three other chambers there. One was Lishkat Hatzlaim, what we just mentioned. The next was Lishkat HaChotamot, then Lishkat Beit HaMoked, then Lishkat Shosim Balechem HaPanim, where they prepared the showbread. Okay, now, again, the Chotamot were all those tokens that we talked about in Masechet Shkalim that they would buy, right? They would then take the token and bring it to the next guy, and with that, they would have the amount, right? It would say Gdi, or whatever animal they needed and how many libations they needed for that animal. Then in Masechet Midot, it says there were 4 lishakot of the Beit HaMoked. That's the same thing. And it describes them a little bit more about the paspasim that separate between the Kodesh and Chol. And then it tells us where they were. And here comes our big contradiction. Ma'aravit Dromit hiyata lishkat lekorban. In the south, right, we saw it before in the northwestern corner. Here it says it's in the southwestern corner. So how does it work? Is it southwest? Is it northwest? To which Rav Huna said, very simply, Tamid was said according to the tradition of the Chachamim. Midot was said according to the tradition of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now, this is a very interesting idea because what it's trying to tell us, and we've seen this before, is that there were different traditions about what the temple looked like, how things worked in the temple, and all sorts of things like that. So because of that, each one was a different tradition, and we've been talking about this all along. Okay. Now they say, how do we know Masechet Midot was Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Again, I'm just going through basic structure and a few details among that structure. How do we know? By the way, today, this is why I also wanted to set it up, we're going to have a different resolution to that contradiction. If you already looked at the chart ahead, you saw that there's a different resolution. One is to say one is Chachamim, they're two different traditions. The next answer is going to be they're actually the same tradition, and they're just, and we'll see, I won't continue, we'll get to it soon, what the difference is. Now, Rav Huna said it's Midot. How do we know that Midot is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? How do we know that? Oh, very simply, because there's a Mishnah in Masechet Midot. We won't get into the details of it, but the point is that when they describe the 4 chambers in the Ezrat Nashim, and it then says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, I forgot which one, what this one was used for. And there it seems clear he was the one talking until then. So therefore it makes sense. That's it. We could have ended there and it would have been a much simpler daf. But then the daf decided, okay, the Gemara, whoever edited this, decided we're going to add another proof. We can also prove that's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. How? And that's where we got into this very complicated calculations about the height of the different places in Har HaBayit. And the main thing being that the Mishnah said all the walls that were above the gates. Remember, you have a gate. What does a gate mean? A gate means there's something above it, right? You can't have a gate without something above it. So the question is, how much was there above the height of this wall, this opening or not? So every time you had these gates, now again, I want you to visualize what we're talking about. When you look at Har HaBayit and you look at where the temple is going to be, right? So you're going to come from the east side, because that's what we're talking about here, where the Kohen HaSoref Tapara is looking inside. And he wants to be able to stand at Har HaZeitim and look inside and see all the way into the Hechal. Now, it's very easy to do that to a certain extent because all the gates were in the center. Right? Everything is centered. You can feel the way they built this, right? Everything goes, the main things are in the center. And the openings are all the gates are in the center. So you look at one, they're all opposite each other. So basically, if it was all on one level, you'd be able to look in one entranceway and see all the way in. Because as long as everything's open, you can see all the way in. Now, the idea being the Kohen who's burning the para has to be able to see into the Heichal when he's sprinkling the blood of the para aduma. Now, one thing I missed yesterday, which is very important. Where exactly was the Kohen standing on Har HaZeitim, right? This was something that was a little bit confusing because then we want to know what he can see. The point of this, and I missed this yesterday, is that there's a special place where he stands. And in fact, there's a tradition about where it is, and we'll talk about the height of where it is because I looked into it yesterday, and where exactly the height of that is and where. And the point is that he's standing somewhere on Har HaZeitim. And the point is when he sprinkles the blood, he has to go to a level where he can see all the way in. In other words, that level is going to depend on who you hold by and where he's looking. So when we kept talking about that everything was at eye level, it's because we're going to situate him in the spot at Har HaZeitim where he can see at eye level all the way in. So if you're the rabbis, and there we got to, again, based on your calculations of all the steps and how they were, and thank you to our architects who pointed out to me that these half amma steps that are an amma up and an amma in are very poorly designed steps in terms of modern architecture and how they're not exactly a very comfortable step at that size, but that's an interesting architectural point. But assuming that the description is the accurate description, that's the size, the height, then again, what happened? When you get to the first entrance into the Mikdash, you're at level 0. Then you go up 6 amot, the first up into the Ezrat Nashim. From the Ezrat Nashim to the next one is 7.5 to the Ezrat Yisrael. That's 13.5 amot. Then, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, you go up another step and possibly 3 more, but let's ignore those for right now. Another step, you get up to 14.5. And then to get into the Ulam, there's another 12 steps, which is another 6 amot. So now, when you're at that level, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, you're 20.5 amot up from the floor level, the ground level at the beginning. Now, if that first petach is 20 amot, and the Kohen's going to stand, now here's the important part that I didn't say yesterday, if the Kohen's going to stand at Har HaZeitim at that height level, so he could see all the way in through that opening, what's going to happen? He won't see anything of the Heichal because the Heichal is above that space, right? The floor, all he's going to see is the ground underneath it, which is not what he's supposed to be seeing. That's why Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, and that's what we're going to assume it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov who says it, that the wall above that had to be low. The Kohen had to stand at a higher point where he could see basically in between the wall above that entrance to the next wall, which is going to be above the next entrance, which is 6 amot higher. So if the height of that wall starts at 20, let's assume it's an amma or 2 amot to 22, let's say, he still has 4 cubits of vision before the next gate that now has a wall above it, because that next gate is 6 amot taller off the ground. It's still the same height of 20 amot. Then there's going to be a wall above it. Well, that wall is going to block it. So it has to be within that range. And in fact, what was interesting, Shuli, who now works for me, she looked into this and she told me that she went on Google and you can see that the spot that they believe where the Kohen stood, okay, which is, they call it Chalkat Tashach, where the people from 1948 were buried. Chalkat Tashach, because that's the year 1948. They stood there. There's an actual spot, and the height of that is just a little bit above the height of the Even Shtia, which is where we believe the Kodesh, the Aron sat on top of that. That is the floor of the Heichal. So it makes perfect sense because, right, and that's how they got to that height. Something makes perfect sense. They got to that height from this Gemara, or the Mishnah and Midot, because they say that if you're standing at that height, you're just above the height of the Heichal, the bottom of the Heichal, and that's exactly what you're going to see when you look across. Okay, so that's really the background. That's the whole of what we saw yesterday. Again, I'm not going to get into, and those I think were much simpler calculations, which is what was in the room, the 187 and the 135 and where you measure, right? That was a little bit more simple. Okay, so that's the idea of where the Kohen stands. And it's very interesting. You can look into it, how, where the exact spot he stood and how it works. So thank you to Shuli for doing that research for me that I wouldn't have known how to do. And okay, and thank you for people for asking questions about it, because that also got me to research it further. Now, there was the one last point that I wanted to point out that also came from another question of someone, which is, then what happened in the Gemara? So the Gemara said, there you see, further proof, midot, right? Remember, it's further proof. The first proof was very clear because he said, I forgot what was there, which means he was the author. Further proof from these walls. To which the Gemara said, Rav Ada bar Abba said, what do you mean? You could say it's Rabbi Yehuda. It has nothing to do with that one extra step that was Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And that's why we got beyond the 19 and a half amot and we're above the 20 mark line. No, even according to the rabbis, you would have a problem if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda. And the Mizbeach, which is 9 cubits tall, was centered in front of the Ulam. If it's centered in front of the entrance to the Ulam and the Heichal, and it's 10, right? The opening is 10 cubits. Then when you're looking and you want to see straight in, you can't see straight in because you have a big altar blocking your view. And if you're higher than the altar, then you're fine. But if you're lower than the altar, you won't see anything. And that's why the wall has to be low, so that you can see over the wall and so that you can have some vision, because the Mizbeach is going to be at 23 and a half cubits because the floor there was 13 and a half. You now go up, 22 and a half, 9 cubits more. And then you're going to end up, again, your vision is blocked. Okay, to which the Gemara answers, no, it can't be Rabbi Yehuda, because we know that Midot doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda in terms of where the Mizbeach is located in the temple. Because remember our description, according to all those numbers of the 135 cubits across the room, we got to that the Mizbeach was situated at 72 and a half, which is 5 cubits past the midpoint, which is 135 divided by 2 is 67.5. So it's 5 cubits past. Now, someone asked also a good question, which is, if it's 5 cubits into it and the whole entrance is 10 and it's centered, then 5 of those cubits are covering the entrance. So either which way, it's covering the entrance, but it's not really true because the Mizbeach was 32 by 32. That's true. However, 1 cubit on each side was for the Yesod, really only on 2 sides, but the Mizbeach wasn't actually a full square. Because if you remember, the base only is on 2 sides, but they still call it a square of 32 by 32, because if you take the edges and kind of make a square on the other side, and another cubit is the Sovev. So when you get to this higher height above 20, you actually only have 28 by 28, which means that it's only going to jet out 3 amot into the north side, and you're still going to have 2 cubits of vision there. And that's why they end up saying, can't be the Mishnahs like Rabbi Yehuda, because we don't hold that the Mizbeach was centered. Midot doesn't hold that way. Forget about whether we hold that way or not, but in Midot, it doesn't hold that way. So you can't say Midot is Rabbi Yehuda, to which the Gemara concluded, Elalav, Shmamina, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That was a whole review of yesterday's daf. We had the luck that our daf is very short, so we could spend the time doing that. Now we're going to move on to, as I said, our second answer. So again, we're back to our first original contradiction. Was the Lishkat Beit HaTzlaim in the northwest or in the southwest corner of this Beit HaMoked? Okay, again, I'll show you a picture of the Beit HaMoked just so you can visualize it again. I have a bigger map. Let's see if this is more useful than my other one. Yeah, this looks much better. Okay, the Beit HaMoked is over here. So again, this is our entrance, right? All along we've been talking about, here you can see it. Here's one gate, right, into the Ezrat Nashim, right? There's the first gate. There's the second gate. You see these are the stairs, right? Right, these are stairs going up. This is the second gate. This is the third, right? Then here's the Duchan where it went up, the step that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, and then right there's the entrance to the Heichal over there. So now here's the Lishka that we're talking about. Okay, this is the Beit HaMoked. Okay, right here. That's what we're discussing. So now, okay, this map has south at the top and north at the bottom, which I know people think is a little bit strange. Okay, also on my sheet, I'm going to show it that way. It's just the way they do these maps. I don't know why it's a little bit odd, but that's how they describe it. So now we're standing here and we want to know, is it in the southwest corner? Okay, or is it in, that would be the southwest corner, which you see here, it says approved offerings. That's this room. where they already, and that's why is it the Lishkat Beit HaTzlaim? This is where they check the animals for a few days before. And once it was good, they would put it in here and then they're ready for slaughtering. So they put it in the southwest corner. But according to Masechet Tamid, it was in the northwest corner. So now we're going to have to figure out, right, which you already know the answer based on the map, but where it was exactly. So we said, right, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said south. We're going to go, right, versus Chachamim. Now we have a different answer. Rav Ad B'Reid Rav Yitzchak Amar, Hai Lishka Iktsuye Miktzia. Not exactly clear what that means. We're going to see I'll show you two different models of what it means. Pull up the sheet where I drew some pictures of it. So here we have, okay, according to Rashi, what does that mean? Iktsuye Maktzia. It was a long, right? We assumed, and you can see, right, the pictures have them kind of squares or maybe rectangles, but each equal in each corner. Okay, very square kind of look. But here, according to Rashi, what it means is the room was long and it jutted out. It started in the south, let's assume. Okay, we don't really know that yet, but in the end, we're going to say that, as I already showed you on the map, so I can give it away at this point. But started in the south and it jutted down into the north. In other words, it starts in the corner like all the other rooms, but it was a much longer room. So now let's just keep going with Rashi and then we'll go to the other interpretation. It all depends on your perspective. When you walk into that long room from the south side, it looks to you like the room goes all the way into the north. And when you're in the north side and you look in, since it's a long room, it looks like the room is in the south. So it's really a matter of your perspective when you go into that room or where you're standing. Okay, so therefore, if you come in the north, it's going to look like it's in the south. And when you come from the south, it's going to look like it's in the north. So if we look at our contradiction, right, according to this, so in Tamid, it said it was in the north because it's looking at the perspective of someone coming in from the south side. And in Midot, it was talking about someone who came in from the north, and it looks like it's in the south. So it really depends on your perspective. According to the Aruch, it wasn't this bigger, longer room. It was that it wasn't actually situated in the corner. And again, I just keep saying this, but that's why the picture is not so fair, because it's hard to visualize this once you have the picture in the map, right? Both of these are a little hard to visualize. Obviously, we don't hold by this answer because the picture, or at least the people who put the pictures together didn't go by this. They went by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, meaning the first answer. But according to this answer, it wasn't. The other three rooms are in the corners of this big Beit HaMoked area. But this one was off from the side, and it was kind of part in the north and part in the south. And therefore, again, it's just a matter of your perspective. You could say it's in the north, you could say it's in the south. It all really depends where you're coming from. Now we're left with, okay, and again, it's a little bit unfair because I already showed you the map, so you know what it looks like, but they're now going to say, well, if it's just a matter of perspective, it had to be, though, situated either in the north or in the south, right? Because even if you say like the Aruch that it was kind of in both, it's still, there's one other room that was in the other corner. So you're going to have to figure out exactly which one it was in order to know where the other ones are. So they say, and it seems to be that it's going to be in the south, okay, the southwest. Why? And it's going to take a little while till we understand this, so patience. It's going to have to build on a few things. Now, we keep talking all along about this contradiction, right? This contradiction between Tamid and Midot, particularly when it comes to this issue of the Beit HaTzlaim. But now we're going to say there's another contradiction between Midot and Lechem HaPanim. And that's why I'm bringing up the chart here. So if you're not watching, you can try to view the chart on the sheet, on the sheet that I prepared that sits on our site. Here's the order in Midot. We started with Ma'aravit Dromit is the Shkat Le Korban. Okay, we're going to focus now on the Lechem HaPanim. Then we go to Dromit Mizrachit. Okay, we now go eastward toward the southeast side. Okay, we started on southwest. Now we're going to southeast. This is where they did the Lechem HaPanim. Okay, so you're basically next to the Lishkat HaTzlaim. Instead of on the southwest, you're now on the southeast. Mizrachit Tzfonit. I didn't exactly do these directions in the right direction as if they're a map. Just go with it. It doesn't, right? It's really more important to see the whole, like how you went. Then we have Masechet Tamid, which says, now notice the order is different. It doesn't go right away to Lechem HaPanim. Then it says, Echad Lishkat Chotamot, Echad Lishkat Beit HaMoked, and Echad Lishkat Shosim B'Lechem HaPanim. Remember, we discussed that 2 and 3 here appear in different ways in Masechet Midot. We're not going to focus on that. But now we have the one where they did the Lechem HaPanim. So now, it's mentioned as number 4. The assumption of the Gemara is that the order is important. And they're in a particular order because that's the way, if you go around the room, right, that's the way you're going to get from one to the other. Now, when you go around the room, how do you go? Well, we already talked about when the Kohanim go, they always walk liyamin, right? They're always going to go to the right. And then they're always going to go, right, to east, in the eastern direction. So now, according to this, let's understand. Umeshaninan, so if you're going to say that the order of the Mishnah is significant and that we're going to the right all the time and basically counterclockwise, that's why I put it like this, because this is showing it counterclockwise, then you're going to basically end up that the Lechem HaPanim is in a different place according to each interpretation. Because if you're always going to start in Lishkat HaTlaim and you're going to go first to Lechem HaPanim in Masechet Midot and last to Lechem HaPanim in Masechet Tamid, then the Lechem HaPanim is going to, the room that where they prepared the showbread is going to end up in a different place, right? It'll either be in the southeastern corner, according to Midot, which it says explicitly, or in the opposite corner in the northwest, because you're going to go around and end up there fourth. So therefore, what does Rav Huna say to this? Again, we're not yet where we want to get to. We want to prove, we don't yet know why. We want to prove how, we don't yet know how. We want to prove that the Lishkat HaTlaim sat in the southwest corner. And the whole reason we have a question is because in one source it says southwest, and in the other it says northwest. So how do we resolve this? So let's see. Since they brought this as a contradiction, said this seems to contradict. And they respond and say, well, Amar Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua, here's a resolution to the contradiction. Mar kachashiv derech yamin, umar kachashiv derech small. Oh, don't worry about it. Each one was going in a different direction. Okay, meaning, okay, let's go in again. In Masechet Mido, we have it perfectly. You start in Lishkat HaTlaim in the southwest. You're now going to move counterclockwise to the southeast. You're going to be at Lechem HaPanim there. And that's exactly, that matches perfectly what it says there. Because what does it say? Dromit Mizrachit, which is southeast, is the Lishkat Shasu Lechem HaPanim. So southeast is where it is. That makes perfect sense. And then you keep going around, you get to the other. If you go derech small, and you start now, this is only going to work, and that's why we're going to prove, that's why my map shows it in the south, that the Lishkat HaTlaim was in the southwest. That's what we're trying to prove. I want to point out one really important thing. In Midot, it told you all the directions. It said Maravit Dromit, that's where this is. Dromit Mizrachit, that's where this is. Mizrachit Tzfonit, right? It told you every direction. That's why that's an easier one to understand. In Masechet Tamid, it didn't say. It just said, there's this, that, and that. And it said only the first one where it is, and it said it's in the northwest. Now, if we start in the northwest, this whole thing isn't going to work. It's to resolve the contradiction, you have to start in the southwest. And how so? So if you start in the southwest and you start to go clockwise now, okay? So how do you go clockwise? So remember, it started with Tlaim. It moved to the Chotamot. So now instead of southwest, you're now northwest. You're still on the west side, but you're in the north. Then you go to Lishkat Beit HaMoked. You're now northeast. And now you go to southeast, and you're going to get to Lechem HaPanim. And there it ends up in the southeast, which is exactly where we wanted to go. So that's what the Gemara says. If you say it was in, that whole thing started in the southwest. Since you start in the southwest, then again, this is all based on Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua, who said, in order to resolve the contradiction between Tamid and Midot, that in Midot it was second and in Tamid it was fourth, we're just going to say that they each went in a different direction. One counted the places clockwise, which is Tamid, and Masechet Midot counted it counterclockwise, which according to the words of the Gemara, counterclockwise is yamin, clockwise is small. Okay? And that resolves your contradiction because then you'll end up in the same spot, assuming that, again, you're obviously right, assuming that when you said Lishkat Tzlaim and Masechet Tamid, you meant that it was in the southwest. But if you say you started with Lishkat Tzlaim in the southwest, then it's not going to work. Why? So let's do it. If you're going to go, and Rav Huna said you go clockwise. So let's start. I mean, it's obvious. If you're going to start clockwise from a different place, you're going to end up in a different place. But let's go through it. So you start at the northwest side. You move to the northeast because you're going small, right? You move to the northeast. You're going clockwise. Then you move to the southeast. And then you finally get with number 4, which is Alechem Apanim, to the southwest. Now you're going to have this in the southwest, and we needed it to be in the southeast in order to resolve this contradiction. So since he resolved the contradiction in that way, and it makes no sense then to start in the northwest side, it must be that we start in the southwest side, and therefore we say, yes, it's true, it was an issue of perspective, but where did it actually sit? It was in the southwest. Okay, that's our resolution. And that's all because the way Rav Huna resolved this Lechem Apanim issue, Rav Huna B'Rei Rav Yeshua, the way he resolved the Lechem Apanim issue was to say it's all a matter of, did you go to the right, or did the person describing the Mishnah describe things in a clockwise direction or describe the rooms in a counterclockwise direction, each one in a different place. And that's how we can end, right? One could be listed as number 2 in the list, and one could be as number 4, and yet they end up in the same location because you're just going a different way. Okay, it sounds kind of complicated. It's actually quite simple. There's also pictures. If you didn't like my pictures, there's pictures in the Morot Yomi. You can also follow there if that was more helpful. They didn't add all the names of all the other places, so I thought to just make my own. But now we have one question on this before we move on to a much simpler sugya. But wait, how can you say that he was going to the east? That he was going to small, that he was going in a clockwise direction. Didn't we say kol pinot shata poneh lo yu ela derech yamin lemizrach? We're always going to the right and to the east. In other words, whenever you go, right? We talked about this 2 days ago. I think it was 2 days ago, if not yesterday, right? When you go out, he went up the ramp and he immediately turns to his right. He's always going right. Okay, that's just the way you go. And lemizrach, which they mean basically counterclockwise. So that's always the direction you go in the mikdash. So how can you say the Masechet Tamid is describing things in a clockwise direction when we're always supposed to be going counterclockwise in the temple? So the obvious answer is like this. Hanimile ba'avoda. When we said you're always supposed to turn to the right and go counterclockwise, what we mean is when you're doing work in the temple. That's not what we're talking about here. Here, what are we doing? We're just counting. We're counting. There were 4 chambers, and we're saying what were those 4 chambers, and right, we're just stating what these chambers were. We're not walking in the temple. So yes, one could claim, well, it makes sense if you're going to describe the rooms and you're going to go in some sort of order. Why don't you go in the order the Kohanim are walking? And that's actually what they do in Midot. But the Mishnah Tamid, for whatever reason, he decided to list them in whatever order, right? He decided to go clockwise instead of counterclockwise when describing the rooms. It's not like there's a halacha about how you make a list and your list has to be ordered in a particular way. So that's not really a contradiction. And with that, they finish. Okay, someone asked about the chart and why it says certain lishakot and not others, right? There was a debate about it. So I just put, whether it was the stones that were there or, right? So I don't even remember. I think I put the ones that appear on the map. Right, I could have, I put the Chotamot and the Beit HaMoked, but I could have put the other ones. It was more just what I chose to put there. It wasn't significant. That wasn't the important part for the charts about which lishakot there were. There's a debate about that. Okay, what the names of the other ones were and what their function was. Okay, now we're going to go on to our next sugya. So we're finished with these Mishnayot. Again, I want to remind you, how did we get here? Well, we got here because, remember, we started with a Mishnah in Yoma, the contradiction of Mishnah in Tamid, and the answer was, that's one tradition, and this is one tradition. And then we get to, well, here's another sugya that's very similar, where we have one Mishnah that contradicts another Mishnah, and we say they're different traditions. And they're both really the same idea, because it's telling us in the temple, there were these different traditions about how things went about. And most of the people talking, like not Rabbi Yehuda is fourth generation Tana, but Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is second generation Tana, who spanned, he was alive also in the time of the temple and also post-temple. And that's why he was very significant in giving over information, because he actually saw the temple as opposed to other people who were basing it on traditions that they had learned from their teachers, but hadn't actually seen the temple in reality. Okay, now let's get moving on to the last part of our daf, which is Kohen Gadol. If you remember in the Mishnah, it was talking about the Kohen Gadol. Okay, who can remember where we're up to, right? The Kohen Gadol was working in the temple. He had to do all the different actions in the temple. This actually, someone also pointed out to me that I should mention in this context. The Kohen Gadol, we said, didn't do avoda in the mikdash in general, right? Certainly not. We talked about how the Romans also took away his clothing and he couldn't. There is one thing the Kohen Gadol did every day, and that's the minchat chabitim. If you remember, we talked about that mincha offering he has to bring twice a day. We had the whole discussion, what if he dies and who brings it, etc. That for sure he brought every day. But what we were talking about were the rituals of all the sacrifices that go on, the communal offerings and other offerings, that he wasn't usually involved in. Okay, he did bring this one meal offering, but that's kind of different than everything else because that was his own personal. But in terms of doing work like the other Kohanim did, generally it went to the other Kohanim and not to him. But if he wanted, he could do whatever he wanted in the temple. He could just come in and say, listen, I know it's your turn, but I'm doing this today. So now we're going to understand a little bit better by bringing a bride to the talks about this. Tanu Rabbanit. Ketzad makriv chelik b'rosh. What does it mean that he can do any sacrifice that he wants? Omer ola zo ani makriv, mincha zo ani makriv. They bring two extreme examples. The ola, which gets burnt entirely, the mincha offering, which isn't even an animal sacrifice, right? He can say, I want to do the meal offering. He could say, I want to do a sacrifice, and they have no choice but to let him do it. Next case, ketzad notel chelik berosh. What does it mean that he gets any part of the sacrifice that he wants? Omer chatat zo ani ochel, asham ze ani ochel. First example is he could come along and say the sin offering and the guilt offering were given to the Kohen, the meat of it. He could come and say, listen, I know you did the sacrifice. You were the Kohen who did the sacrifice, but I'm taking the meat. And he could take the meat. Now there's a debate, because we're going to see in a minute, that he actually can't take the whole portion of certain things. Is that true here also? Because it makes it sound like he can actually take all the meat. There's a debate about whether this means, no, he only takes a portion of the meat, or does it actually mean he could take all of the meat of a guilt offering or a sin offering? Some people also say, why did they start with ola, burnt offering, and mincha, and then in the next section talk about guilt and sin offering? Theoretically, they could have started off with sin offering and then just continued with sin offering. But some people say that with the reason why they chose, either it's just they're choosing different examples, or it could be they chose specifically to move to different things to show, even if you used the same cases, you might have thought in the event that he did the work, then he got to eat the meat. But this is trying to tell you, no, he could have done the work on those sacrifices and not these, and yet he could still claim, I want rights to the meat, and he can take it. Okay, again, you hear this and you think, oh, wow, this could be a great example, where someone could really abuse their power and start taking all this meat from people who did the work. It seems a little bit unfair. But on the other hand, since he didn't exactly have his own jobs to do, he also doesn't get any food. So you also need to feed him somehow. And he is the Kohen Gadol and deserving of respect. So we're going to see exactly how much he gets. So according to this, again, as I said, it's not exactly clear if he gets the entire chatat, all the meat of it, again, all the meat that goes to the Kohen, as opposed to the parts that get burned on the altar, or only part of it. V'notel chala mishtei chalot. This is from the korban that they brought, sacrifice on Shavuot. With the animals, they brought the shtei halechem, which were 2 loaves of bread. So he gets one of those loaves. So notice he doesn't get everything. Arba o chamesh mimaseh lechem hapanim. Lechem hapanim, there were 12 loaves. And it was given to the Kohanim at the end of the week. He gets 4 or 5, according to the rabbis, which means he doesn't even get half, right? Less than half. Rebbe Omer lo olam chamesh. He always gets 5, which we're going to see means half, which is a little bit strange because 5 is not half of 12. So if you look in Rashi says arba o chamesh, on about the same line in Rashi, a little bit above. Bechol Shabbat v'Shabbat each week. Ulekame mefaresh matai arba matai chamesh. Oh, sorry, I read the wrong thing. Right, the Gemara is going to explain later when he gets 4, when he gets 5. That's a different thing. What I wanted to read was Mechzel Aaron. Okay, even though we didn't read it inside yet, but I'll show you. Okay, maybe we'll read it inside and then we'll read Rashi. But he says here, you always get 5. Shenemar, v'ayta la'aharon u'lebanav. It goes to Aaron and his sons. Mechza la'aharon u'mechza lebanav. Okay, he gets half and they get half because it says all these things should be for Aaron and his sons. Notice they put Aaron in one category, sons in the other category. That means 50-50. To which Rashi says, even though there's 12, it's not actually half. Rebbe's going to explain that there were 2 loaves that didn't get divided, and that's why he gets 5. That 5 is half. Okay, so according to him, he gets half. According to the rabbis, it seems the 4 or 5 are not exactly half. Okay, it doesn't actually get the full half. So now we're going to bring up an issue here. So according to this Braita, we're going to have a bit of a contradiction, and I'm going to pull up the chart again so you can see. Ha gufa kasha. This Braita is actually difficult. Why? Okay, so if you look at the Braita, so again, it started off with how does he take chelik b'rosh? She says, I want this olah, I want to work, sacrifice this olah, I want to do this one. Okay, that's not relevant. Then it says, how does he take a portion? He says chatat, he says Hashem, I could take it, no problem. Okay, again, we weren't sure what this meant really, so it's hard to know to raise an issue about this yet. But now it says, keep going on in the Braita. Amart notel chala chamishtei chalot. Now, if you get 1 out of 2 chalot, okay, this is simple math. That means you get half. Now, if you get half, whose opinion is that? That's Rebbe. Damar palvashakil. That line is Rebbe because you get exactly 50%, which is what Rebbe said. But ema mitziata. But then the next line is arba o chamesh mimase lechem apanim. That is atan Rabbanan. Damar lo shakil pag. That's obviously the rabbi's approach, who thinks you don't get half. And then ema seifa Rebbe omer lo lam chamesh. Because, right, then the next line is Rebbe says you get 5, which is half. So now we're a little bit struggling because we started with half, we go to less than half, and then we go back to half. So it's Rebbe, rabbis, Rebbe. That makes no sense. To which Abaye answers, Amar Abaye, Reisha u'mitziat Rabbanan. Really, that line, Notel chalam mishtei chalot, is also the rabbis. In which case, we have Rabbanan, and then we have Rebbe, which makes more sense that we're first bringing the approach of the rabbis, and then we move to the Rebbe's approach. Now, how does he explain that? Why does he get 1 out of 2 loaves if really he's not supposed to get half? This is a very simple reason. Umodu Rabbanan bePrusa, and this, by the way, comes up when we talk about matnot kuhuna, about this issue of giving him a piece. If you have to take the shei lechem and start splitting it by percentage, whatever percentage you say, 4 or 5 out of 12, or something like that, you'd have to start cutting up that loaf of bread. Now, to give the Kohen a chunk of bread is not respectful. To give a Kohen Gadol, specifically a high priest, a piece of a loaf of bread is not going to be very nice. And that's why, even though he doesn't really deserve half, but there's no other way to give him a portion other than to give him 1 out of 2 loaves. So that's rabbis. That continues in the rabbi's approach. Tomorrow, we're going to go much more in depth into these opinions. What is Arba Chamesh, and how does this work, and why was 5, how is 5 out of 12 considered half? So we'll deal with those questions tomorrow, and that's it for today. Hope that the explanation in the beginning was helpful. If you still have questions, you can ask me after class. You can write to me. Happy to answer.